Hello, and welcome to Class 6, Part 1, Operations for the Warren County Community College Small Unmanned Aircraft System Drone Program. In this section, what we're going to talk about are elements of the Part 107 tests that will cover legal, environmental, and operational considerations. What you'll see here is a set of slides that were produced by the FAA to go over there are various components or overview of safe operations in the National Airspace System, or the NAS. So we're going to go through a number of things. One of the things you must remember is that you must register any small unmanned aircraft system between 0.55 and 55 pounds. That's going to be the answer for the test. But do know, if you are dealing with commercial operations and you were flying, say, a Mavic Mini, which or like the DJI Tilo, and it is below 0.55 pounds, but you were actually using it for commercial operations, I would strongly suggest that you have that registered as well. But if you're going to fly the drone outside and it's between the weights 0.55, so a little over half a pound, and under 55 pounds, and remember, it is under 55 pounds, and that's everything on the drone itself. So if the drone is 3 pounds, but you've added extra elements to it, you need to consider that. That'll be below 55. But if you were a large drone and you added some peripherals and it went above 55 pounds, even though the drone as you bought it was 55, you've modified it above the 55 pound, and you would need special waivers from the FAA to fly something like that. But for the most part, for most commercial operations, you're going to have no problem fulfilling any mission with a drone between these two weight classes. Understand that you must, by law, provide your name, address, and email. And non-recreational owners must provide the make, model, and serial number of each small unmanned aircraft system. Now, if you were to build your own, then obviously it wouldn't have a serial number, but there is a place in the drone zone for you to let the FAA know that it is not a commercial off-the-shelf drone. So you would register your drone at the drone zone. There are actually other ways to register your drone by via paperwork, especially if you were going to use your drone in another country. If I was on the Canadian border, I would definitely Google and look into something along those lines. Just some things that you should know, and this is kind of the knowledge area topics for Part 107. Let's talk about initial new remote pilots, because that's going to be the majority of the people now. And you can see there the questions that'll be there for the recurrent test, so you know what to look over. And always check up on this, because this is subject to change, so this may change. But the latest testing procedures and what they're going to test you on will be in the front of your ASA test prep book. They do put that in the before the chapters begin in the introductory sections. But you should know that you're going to get applicable regulations relating to small unmanned aircraft systems on both the initial and the recurrent. You're going to need to know airspace classification, operating requirements, and flight restrictions on both the initial and the recurrent. Aviation weather, effects of weather on performance, you're going to get that on the initial. Small unmanned aircraft loading, you're going to get on the initial. Emergency procedures, and these do change, so that's why you're going to get them both on the initial and the recurrent. Crew resource management is a growing concept in aviation. You're going to get that on the initial and the recurrent. Don't get, if you're like me and you have a background in leadership and management, and that was where your work came from, and you will hear aviators talk about how this was a new concept. For those of us who've been around a long time, we realize that their new concept from the 70s was invented in the 1920s, but it's new to them. So just let them have that. Radio communication procedures on the initial, determining the performance of small unmanned aircraft initial, psychological effects of drugs and alcohol on the initial. And, the things to remember for that is 0.04, anything above 0.04, you're intoxicated. That's usually a little bit different than, and a little bit more restrictive than operating a motor vehicle. And remember, 8 hours bottle to throttle. So in other words, you have to let 8 hours pass after your last drink before you pick up the remote control. So bottle to throttle, 8 hours bottle to throttle, you can remember that, and 0.04, which in many states is about half the legal limit for an automobile. So remember, more restrictive, and it should be. Aeronautical decision-making and judgment, you're going to find that on both the initial and the recurrent. Airport operations on the initial and the recurrent, and then pre-flight inspection procedures on the initial and the recurrent. So remember, everything is your responsibility, as we talked about in the last video series, as the remote pilot in command. So you have to register your aircraft. You have to do the pre-flight aircraft and briefing of the crew. So you should have checklists for both the aircraft, the remote control, and any crew. And that's where your CRM or your crew resource management is going to come into play. You need to assess the operating environment. So you should be assessing, you can't accidentally fly over people because you didn't check the environment. You can't accidentally fly over automobiles driving on a road because you didn't check the environment. It's always your responsibility. Designate and remote pilot in command. There must always be, for each single aircraft in the sky, there must be one remote pilot in command. And of course, because this was by the FAA, they're saying, be the remote pilot in command, take that leadership role, but get yourself good training first, at least pass your Part 107, at least practice flying somewhere so that you get the feel and the understanding of small unmanned aircraft systems. There are things that do go wrong. It is a flying camera, a flying computer. For the FAA, it is an aircraft. But we know, you've used computers and there are glitches that happen all the time. So the ability to counter those, you're going to need to have. Adhere to all the operational rules. Look, take these rules and regulations seriously. They're there to not only protect you from doing something that you're going to regret the rest of your life, but they're there to protect all of us who are not flying at the time. We may be driving by. We may be on the ground. You can Google videos of things and see some horrific things people did with drones, especially in the earlier days, because they were thought of as toys. And in some people, they still kind of view them that way because you can buy them at Walmart. But realize these are aircraft in the sky and they have the potential to do great harm when not used appropriately. Which brings us to the last thing that the FAA is going to tell you: fly safe. So ultimately, fly responsibly. All these elements are going to be throughout your Part 107 tests. And if you kind of keep the overview there, it'll help you if you get to a question you didn't see before, you don't understand completely, if you remember these guidelines. So register your aircraft. You register it at the drone zone. Remember, dronezone.gov, FAA.gov. Do not go to dronezone.com. There are a number of such sites out there that all you're doing is giving your personal information to somebody who's probably going to try to sell you something or something more nefarious. All right. If it's greater than 0.55 pounds, register it. Okay, these are the references. Part 107.13 is your registration if you wanted to look that up. And then other elements that are there as well. Part 107.15, conditions for safe operation. The aircraft must be in a condition for safe operation. It's your responsibility to check that. You must check the condition of the UAS prior to flight. Understand, when they say prior to flight, that's not prior to the first flight of the day. Every time you land that aircraft, the next time you take off, that's a new flight. So keep that in mind. You should go through your checklist again, or at least have a modified checklist for recurrent flights throughout the day. Like if you're changing the battery, you may not have to do everything in the checklist again, but it doesn't hurt if you do. You must land if there's an indication that the unmanned aircraft system is no longer in a condition for safe operation. So if you start to lose a lot of GPS signals, and this can happen, they do move GPS satellites from time to time, and in some places in the United States, you don't have that many to begin with. So understand, if you're not conditioned to be flying in with DJI, since that's when most people will probably fly first, in the attitude mode, if you haven't practiced that, land that drone as safely and quickly as you can when you lose that GPS, because you just, again, that takes practice. If you come to Warren County Community College and go through our flight training, that's actually what we don't let you fly with GPS on your first flight. We want you to fly it as an aircraft in the hardest possible way so that when that happens, and it happens to everyone, you are prepared. 107.49, pre-flight inspection and actions. all control links are working properly. So make sure while it's on the ground, your remote control links are working properly. Make sure you got your telemetry, you see all your data, your camera's working, the aircraft is controlled properly. Go up to 10 feet, or you can go to 20 feet if that's some of the drones. That's what they go to set your home point again. But stay there, hover for a minute, yaw that drone. Roll side to side, go back and forth, go up and down, and do a control check so that because if you just take off and you take off real quick and you get that thing out there, 100, 300 yards away from you, it's up there 300 feet in the air, and then you realize there's a problem, a lot harder to deal with. You realize at 20 feet on the ground, a lot safer mechanism. You can check your frequency interference, all kinds of things. Make sure there's enough available power. And one of the big problems that I've seen over the years is, the batteries that don't maintain their battery life and their power come as a surprise. But probably one of the most interesting things, and I'm always wondering if this wasn't where most of the flyaways came from in the early days, especially, people forgot to charge the remote control. Without a remote control, you're not really going to be able to control the drone. And a lot of the earlier drones didn't have the kind of lost link procedures that we have now. And we'll talk more about that in this video. Make sure anything attached or carried is secure and obviously does not adversely affect the flight characteristics for control. Make sure medical condition. Make sure that if you're the RPIC, remember, you're not going to go through regular medical updates or checkups like you might if you're a manned pilot. So it's your responsibility to make sure you're in a physical and mental condition that doesn't interfere with safe operation, and make sure you're not intoxicated. The alcohol and drugs, no flying 8 hours after drinking, that's the bottle to throttle. No flying under the influence, no blood alcohol content that is 0.04 or greater, and do not use drugs that affect safety. Remember, marijuana is illegal at the federal level, and you may be in a state where it is legal now or it's been decriminalized, but the federal government does not see it that way, and you are regulated by the federal government in aviation. And remember these ideas, the I'm safe rule. Am I ill? Am I on some kind of prescription medication or over-the-counter medication that might impact my ability to think? So, I know that a lot of people take Benadryl. If I take something like Benadryl, which I can buy I'll be asleep in about 10 minutes. So, you got to know your own physiology versus the medication as well. If you're under a great deal of stress, and this can happen because you're trying to get a mission done, realize this is dangerous. You should not be doing that. Alcohol, fatigue. Usually fatigue hits you after you don't even realize you're fatigued. And make sure you have, especially in the hot or cold temperatures, make sure you're keeping hydrated. Make sure you are eating properly so that you have the energy to do the work. So 107.49, pre-flight familiarization. Assess the operating environment. What's the weather? Before you even go out there, you should check the weather for the day. We talked about some apps in the earlier videos. Make sure you've checked your airspace and your flight restrictions. Is the president in town? Is another VIP in town? Is there some other reason? Is there a big event going on? Check your NOTAMs. Check your temporary flight restrictions on 1-800-WX-BRIEF. Make sure you know where people and property are. Check ground hazards, wires, trees, other things that can come across you. One of the risk mitigations we have to do in Warren County Community College up in the mountains is, we're next to a wooded mountainous area here. So we do have coyote and we do have bear here. I know people think, oh, New Jersey doesn't have such things. We do. So we have to keep an eye out for that. That's a ground hazard that could cause a risk. There's nothing like a bear coming out of the woods to affect your ability to keep visual line of sight, on the drone. Brief your crew regarding operating conditions, the emergency procedures, contingency procedures, roles and responsibilities, and potential hazards. If you come into our lab, you'll see we have operating manuals for every drone. We have a safety management system for the college. So we will brief, we go over all these things, and we follow these proper procedures. If you're a small one-person, two-person operation, commercially, you may not need the level of detail that we may at a college or university setting. But again, if you're out there and you're don't even know where to begin on such things, this is a public institution, and I have to hand over documents. It's known as the Open Public Records Act. So send us an email over here and we'll get you a copy of the documents that we've developed. And they're public, they've been paid for by the taxpayer, so steal away. And this is called the risk mitigation, and that's what the safety management system is. It's really how do you mitigate risks. 107.19, the remote pilot in command. Remember, a remote pilot in command must be designated before each flight. Okay, so if two people have a license, two people cannot be in command at one time. One person must be designated as the person in command. That person should accept the responsibility for and is the final authority as to the operation of the UAS during that mission, during that flight. Ensure the aircraft will not harm people, property, or other aircraft in the loss of control. Adhere to the regulations. Be able to direct the small unmanned aircraft to ensure compliance with those regulations. Also remember, you can change remote pilots in command by agreement. If you have two people who are licensed pilots, one can say, listen, I've been at this all day. I'm not feeling well. I'm stressed. I'm hot. You take over. You're in command now. So you are able to pass command. 107.21, in-flight emergency. The remote pilot in command may deviate from any rule to the extent necessary to address an in-flight emergency requiring immediate action. So that's your ability to. So you're flying along, and all of a sudden someone comes over the trees in a manned aircraft. You're at 400 feet. They're at 400 feet. They're coming right at you. You go to 600 feet to get out of their way. You didn't violate the rules and regulations. You avoided a catastrophe. So that's kind of an in-flight emergency example. Adhere to the operational rules. So remember, no operation from a moving vehicle or aircraft. Do not fly a drone from an aircraft, okay, from another aircraft. I've heard rumors of some people with hot air balloons flying drones around there. Do not do that. That could be a catastrophe. You can, if you're not the driver, if you're a passenger, you can operate in a moving vehicle over sparsely populated area if you're not transporting property for compensation or hire. So if you're out, you're taking pictures, you're in a large open farm field trying to take some pictures of some steer, and you're driving around, there's no people around, you're probably fine. And another great example is on boats. You'll see people, again, you cannot be the captain of the boat or the ship. You cannot be driving the ship, but you can be on the back of a boat and using it as long as you're in a sparsely populated area. Remember, you need a waiver. This I expect to change, but right now you need a waiver to fly at night. You can fly at civil twilight if you have the appropriate lighting. You can fly at night with a waiver, and I think they're up to like 87% of people who ask for one of those waivers can get them now. I often suggest there's an attorney named Jonathan Rupert that we use at the college. He's down in Florida. You can look up his information. I think we have him. I think we've done that in a previous. He has a really nice night operation course to kind of certify yourself. That would be, the FAA would look favorably upon something like that you took time to learn how to fly at night. And he probably will even help you write that waiver. As a matter of fact, I know he will. Expect to be compensated, but that could make it a lot easier if you had a small operation and you weren't familiar with all the safety mitigations. He would help walk you through all that. Aircraft must remain within the visual line of sight. You can use vision correction. That means glasses or contact lenses. You must be able to see the aircraft throughout the flight. You can't use binoculars. You can't use the visual observer to daisy chain. This was a misunderstanding early days. You can't have 5 visual observers and they're on a radio and they're telling you they're watching it, but you're holding the remote control and you can't see it. Basically, whoever has the remote control in their hands, person manipulating the controls, or the remote pilot in command, if it is the remote pilot in command that has the remote control, same person, you both must be able to see the drone at all times. You'll get a question on a test. A little piece of the mission will go out of your line of sight, but for a second or two, is that okay? Is that compliant? No. If there is one instance where you cannot see the drone, you are not compliant with the visual line of sight rule. No operation of multiple aircraft. That's the easiest question on a test. How many unmanned aircraft systems can the remote pilot in command operate at once? And the answer is 1. you would need a special waiver again to not do that. You can't transport hazardous materials, and you must yield right of way to all other aircraft. Must not fly so close to another aircraft as to create a collision hazard. So you always have to stay out of the way of other aircraft. If two unmanned aircraft systems are coming towards one another, each should go to the right. And I believe that's a question on the test still as well. No operations over people without a waiver. And that's a pretty complicated waiver to get. You have to have all kind of risk mitigation there. If you are looking into such things as to these kinds of more complicated waivers, then I suggest you look at something called, and you just Google JARUS, J-A-R-U-S, SURA, S-O-R-A. Google that. Follow the guidelines in the JARUS SURA when you're putting your waivers together, and you'll find that a very great open resource, free and open resource that you can use to figure out how to stay safe in the and one of the better ones I've seen. And it's pretty much an independent worldwide operation that kind of has been working on these things to make unmanned aircraft systems safe in the world. You must have authorization to fly in controlled airspace. So if you're in B, C, D, or E airspace, you must have permission to fly there. If you're in a no-fly zone like around DC, you'll probably need both FAA and Secret Service and TSA authorization. So it can be, don't think you're going to get that in minutes. On the test now, they do not have questions yet as of this moment on Lance. That will probably change shortly, and it may change by the time you're listening to this video, or the LANC or the Lance. I call it the Lance system. That's that low altitude control authorization. So be aware that that's out there. That'll often tell you when you're near an airport where you can fly. If you're going to do jobs at the airport, you're going to need to go through the drone zone, get your waiver, and so you have air traffic control. So you're not going to see drone zone on the test. Remember, it's just going to say you need ATC or air traffic control permissions. But no, practically, from a practical standpoint, you make those applications through the drone zone. You must have permission to fly in prohibited or restricted areas. Sometimes you may have things around a controlled firing area or a military operation area or prohibited area. Again, you need permission. A lot of times the prohibited areas, you're probably not going to get it, but military bases often have aspects that close on weekends. And so if you call over, you can frequently get permission to fly there. No interference with operations and traffic patterns at airports. I don't even know why I had to say that. And must adhere to the operating limitations for small unmanned aircraft systems. So we've talked about this. You can't go faster than 87 knots or 100 miles per hour. Maximum altitude of 400 feet above ground or 400 feet within the shadow or the radius of a structure. Flight visibility of at least 3 miles. And here we're talking about statute miles. So you'll see the word statute miles there. And aircraft must remain 500 feet below and 2,000 feet horizontally from a cloud. So fly safe. So this is your catch-all regulation, as the FAA would tell you. 107.23 hazardous operation. A remote pilot in command may not drop an object that causes an undue hazard to people or property. Be cognizant of that. You cannot drop objects that are going to hurt people. Okay. There were some people and again, you can find all these things on YouTube. People got excited at first, and instead of shooting the T-shirt at the stadium out of the T-shirt gun, whatever they call that thing, they were dropping things that can hurt someone. Again, think about insurance. Think about what it would cost you if you got sued. Think about the time of your life you would lose and the money you would lose, and that all of a sudden you'll find most of the time that whatever you have in mind in this regard is not worth it. And you can't operate in a careless or reckless manner so as to endanger the life and property of another. So think about it like this. The best defense you're going to have if you do have something that goes wrong, and invariably, all of us have something that goes wrong. For most of us, it's going to be we're going to crash our drone into a tree or the ground or the propeller is going to fall off. It's not going to hurt anybody. But what's going to keep you in the least amount of trouble is if you followed all the regulations and you've been diligent about your safety and you take it very, very seriously. So we'll go over these a couple more. Prior to each and every flight, the remote pilot in command is responsible, always responsible, and must perform tasks to ensure that the small unmanned aircraft system is in a condition for safe operation. Always, it's up to you. So here's some checklists. These will not be on the test, but if you were going to create your own checklist, if you come to Warren and you take our classes, we're going to give you a series of checklists. We're going to give you all kind of paperwork that you're going to have for the rest of your life that you can update, do whatever you want with. But if you don't, if you're just watching these on YouTube, let me go through a couple things. Check that weather first. Make sure the firmware is updated. Your remote, your batteries, your aircraft. You know, every drone's a little bit different. And a firmware, if you're not familiar, is software for the drone. It's going to update things. If something goes wrong and you haven't updated in forever, you know, you're responsible. Make sure your applications are updated on your phone. A lot of these small unmanned aircraft system run off applications on your iPhone or your Android phone or another iOS device. You know, keep that in mind. Make sure you've updated them. Make sure you've checked your flight route and area planned out so you know what your mission's going to be. Go out, think it through, walk it, site survey, check every obstacle, check it beforehand, check it the day of your flight, because remember, new obstacles may have emerged. We're going to also recommend that you have a photo list and a storyboard. 99% of your commercial missions are going to be about taking pictures. So what are you trying to capture out there? Walk it through, think about it. Think like if you were a director or a photographer. So I know some of you may be, but many of you may be getting into this industry thinking, well, I'm really about the piloting, or I'm really about the flying. Or you may be saying, I'm really about the money. But this is how you make the money. And remember, I always say this to everybody, low and slow is where the money is. Low and slow. You'll get those odd jobs from time to time where you're going to fly very high in the altitude, but for the most part, people are going to want you close by. Remember, if you get a wedding or you get a family or there's some kind of recreational thing people have hired you to take pictures of, only the crew can be flown over with the drone. So the bride and groom is not part of your crew. They are innocent bystanders. So if you fly into them, you've technically violated the rules. You cannot fly over them. So remember, the only people you can really fly over and on your test, the 3 people will be your remote pilot in command, your person manipulating the controls, and any visual observers. Those are your 3 categories. Now, they've expanded a little bit. Now you'll hear words like air boss, security personnel. They're part of the crew. I wouldn't be as concerned about them, but be aware, anybody you're taking pictures of, they're not part of your crew. You cannot fly over them without a waiver. Make sure you've obtained all required permissions, whether it's from the FAA or I also say permissions from property owners. You start flying over people's property. You know, I know there's, people are going to say, well, the airspace, what is the real, this is a pretty gray area. Here's kind of how I've seen it best. And, I'm not a lawyer, so this is not a legal opinion. Please, when you're flying over people's properties, it's upsetting to them. Don't do it unless you absolutely have to. And if you do, go over, knock on the door, explain what you're doing. Say, look, I'm doing this mission. It's not about you. I'm not trying to see you in your pool. I'm all the way over here. When people see a drone flying around, they just assume their privacy is being invaded. Be a professional. Go out there. Get any permissions you can. Do the right thing. You wouldn't want one flying. The first time I ever saw a drone, it was flying over, looking at me on my back deck. I'm like, oh, now what do I got to look forward to in life? Right? It's bad enough can't walk down the street without every house having a camera now. And I got to have people flying over me. This is how people are thinking. So keep that in mind. Don't be part of the problem. Be part of the professional community that brings acceptance to drones. And make sure you have your FAA permissions, any kind of other, military, whatever you are. Go to 1-800-WXBrief.com and check those NOTAMs. Use a product like AirMap. Use Before You Fly application by the FAA. Check everything you possibly can. I like to check 3 different weather things. I like to be so safe that if anything went wrong and I had to explain it to an authority figure at the FAA or the people I work for or my insurance company, I want to be able to say, listen, I took every mitigation possible. Because the last thing I want to do is hurt someone. And I know it's the last thing you want to do too. So be professional. Do any pre-notification requirements. Make sure you charge your aircraft batteries. That includes your remote control battery, as you see right there, controller charged. In the world of UAS, depending on how big, for the most part, you're probably, if you're taking this and you're new to this, you're going to hold a handheld remote control. But understand, there are ground stations out there that can be the size of a large vehicle. So there are some sophisticated ground control stations, as we might call them. But be aware, make sure everything's charged, powered up. Make sure you packed all your equipment. This is an important one. Have your first aid kit with you. Okay, that can go a long way. You may get hit with a drone. One of your crew members could get hit with a propeller or something. If you can mitigate that and be professional. Make sure you brought your your SD card for your pictures. Make sure it's formatted. Make sure it has enough space. Know that some of the drones coming out now are getting so sophisticated, like I'm thinking of the Skydio. It can only run on a super fast SD. Can't take just any SD card and stick it in there. It won't fly. So make sure you've done that. Remember, once you've registered the drone, you're going to get an aircraft registration number. Make sure that registration number is always on the drone. Make sure it's on the outside of the drone. They used to say you could put it in the battery compartment, and you might see that in some old material. That was changed. And if you think about it, let's say the drone flew away, it landed, some member of law enforcement or some innocent bystander comes up and they need to figure out whose drone it is. Well, that could be booby-trapped. That could be a horrible thing. So make sure your registration number is clearly visible on the outside of the drone. I mean, you're a professional. That's why you're taking this course, watching this video. Why do you need your registration hidden? Make sure you've brought all your equipment. Make sure it's present and accounted for. Check before you fly, or AirMap or Kitty Hawk. Everybody likes a different program, and there's nothing wrong with that. I happen to like AirMap for some reason. Before you fly is very much related to all these now. So keep that in mind. For those of you who are new to this, you'll get the before you fly, and it'll be wonderful. And those of us who've been around a while, we'll remember the old version, and we'll know how good it is now. Make sure you inspect your aircraft. Check your propellers. Check your batteries put in. Check your fuselage. Make sure there's no cracks. Make sure remember, those are plastic propellers for the most part, especially on those commercial off-the-shelf drones. You're not going to have that many flights before you start to see wear and tear. Take care. Spend the $10 for some more propellers, or download one of the things and make them on a 3D printer. Whatever you need to do, but make sure they're in good working order. Check your camera. Make sure you've taken your gimbal off. Probably the thing people do most often is they forget to remove the gimbal clamp, and then they have all kind of things. Their gimbal, their camera, the mechanism that it turns the camera burns out. So remember that. Warn your spectators, okay? Warn them. If there's people hanging around, make sure they stay. I like to keep people 25 feet away. Make sure they're 25 feet away from you at all times. You might have to cordon off a second. People have two reactions to drones. They're either really interested and curious, or they really despise them. That seems to be where we are right now. And then I suppose there's indifferent individuals out there. So spectators can come up to you in all kinds of ways, but regardless of what they are, whether they are law enforcement, angry people, curious people who would say, can I fly that? Whatever they are, just remember, you're a professional. So, take the $10 or $20, get yourself a vest that says you're a drone pilot, get yourself something to hang your license from your neck, look the part. Look the part of a professional. I always tell people, and we have these at the college, just carry a clipboard. Somebody with a clipboard. Everybody thinks that person's in charge of something. So do that. And again, these are just kind of visual cues that you are not out there fooling around. You're doing a professional work here. When they come up, just say, listen, I got to finish this. There's all kinds of rules. When I land, I'm happy to tell you what I know about these. Happy to give you let you look at everything. Happy to tell you what I'm doing. If somebody's like, oh, you were looking at my window, say, I'm happy to show you every picture I took. There are people, they'll call the police on you. The police will respect you I train a lot of police officers in our area in drone operations. So, you know, remember, the police are learning this too. No one's born with this knowledge. So, you know, they may want to talk to you too. Be professional. You're out there for legitimate business purposes. Remember that. Don't be arrogant. Be polite. Don't push people. You know, remember, they had a hard job. You got a hard job. It's probably a warm day, a hot day. You know, 16 things probably have gone wrong for everybody that day. So just, you know, be the person that you want to represent the drone industry. That's what we ask. Also, set your home point. So, you know, there are various ways to do this when you take off and land, but always check what's known as the return to home height. Each drone application is a little bit different, but you want to make sure when you're returning to the home point, if you lose the link, that you're high enough, you're not going to run into any buildings, trees. So, but you don't want to be so high that if there are issues, your drone's so high, your flyaway is even going to be worse. We're going to talk about that. So, remove your lens cover, your gimbal clamp. Make sure your SD card is in the aircraft. Put all these things on paper that I'm putting here. Write these down. Create yourself a checklist. You may say, I'm going to remember this. These are obvious. Trust me. So many things happen when you're out there. A checklist is awesome. A paper checklist. You can even put it on your phone. You know, get yourself a book to log your flights. If you want to get any advanced certificates like AUVSI Top, you're going to need to log your flight hours anyway. Be a professional. Verify your systems and links. Make sure everything's functional. I told you kind of how to do that. You know, you go up 20 feet. You set your return to home height. You ensure that your home point is marked on the map so that if you do get a lost link, that they will return to home. Make sure everything's working. Verify that your batteries are fully charged. Check your signal strength. Check your GPS satellite strength. Make sure you have that. Make sure your propellers are tightened, but they're free to move around. They've improved these. They used to screw on a lot. You're seeing a lot less of that, and a lot more of kind of the clip-on wings, especially on the commercial off-the-shelf drones. Keep that in mind. Compass calibration. Look, I recommend this every time you fly. They say if you're within a mile of the last place you flew, you're okay. Why take the risk? It's going to take you 30 seconds. Add the 30 seconds to your day. Do it. Mark it. Have it on your checklist. So if something happens, you can tell whomever is coming out in the authority figure, look, I went through all this. Check your wind speed, your cloud cover. Remember, 500 feet below a cloud, you must maintain 2,000 feet horizontally from a cloud. Check your weather. Make sure that there hasn't been a change. Sometimes the weather forecasts are wrong and you can see it with your eyes. So think about that. And then double check those obstacles again, power lines, trees, buildings, etc. Set that takeoff and landing point. There's all kinds of ways this can happen. There are going to be times when you're going to have to take a hand takeoff and a hand landing or a hand grab out of the sky. And so keep that in mind. You don't always have a point where you can do that. Make sure your antennas are in the appropriate positions. There are different antennas need to be moved differently if you're flying 5.8 gigahertz versus 2.4 gigahertz. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there are plenty of YouTube videos on that. I suggest before you go out there and fly, you get a sense of that as well. Make sure your telemetry or your display panel is functioning properly. Verify all your communication links and your GPS. Start your propellers. Do that control check that I talked about. Yaw. Up and down a little bit, rolling side to side, pitching forward and back, and make sure that everything is operating normally. After you're at post takeoff, just be at a low altitude, recheck any kind of frequency interference. Look for, you'll see this because your screen will kind of flash in and out. You'll get some cues that something isn't right. Make sure your stability and control. Press record if you're going to take videos. Hover for 15 feet for at least 15 seconds. I told you how to do that. I know that some of the DJI, they have the automatically go to 20. That's fine too. Verify all controls are responsive. Complete your mission, land safely, collect your check, pass go, and have a great day. I'm Dr. Will Austin for Warren County Community College. You know, sometimes we go through these videos and it's like, wow, after I do all this, will I have any fun? Let me tell you, drones are so much fun. This is so much fun and such an exciting new endeavor in the world. You'll have more fun when you do things right. I'm wishing you well. Good luck with your flying. See you in the next video.